It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful from here, Neil. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
Every precious minute of their 2.5 hours on the surface was programmed. Rock and soil samples were to be collected, photographs taken, experiments set up to catch unfiltered particles from the sun, to record moonquakes, to measure precisely by laser beam reflection the exact distance between moon and Earth.
Columbia, this is Houston, AOS, over.
Houston, Columbia on the high gain, over.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They're setting up the flag now. I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
Get started here. I'll let Janet first start.
Thank you all for coming and welcome. We're glad to see such a great turnout for such a special occasion. This marks the 50th anniversary of the landing on the moon. And with us today, we are fortunate to have Neil Armstrong with us and his family, which is kind of scattered all over. There's his wife, Kate, in front of us. Thank you so much, Dean. We feel very honored that you took your time to do this for us.
I would like to have our family stand.
All of the family, can you stand? So we're fortunate to have Dean with us today, and we're very grateful for him taking time to do this. We're also fortunate to have with us Grant Tiroff, who is the history teacher at the Marion High School. He's done a great job in presenting some questions and some interview type things with Dean to help make the program go along. Thank you again for coming. Restrooms are out, the girls are out there, the boys are back here. There's refreshments in the back. If you can wait till afterwards, that's fine, but if you need something, go ahead and help yourself. Okay?
Well, thank you, Janet, and thanks for this opportunity. First things first, for those of you who were here because you thought that you're going to be listening to Neil Armstrong, the former football coach of the Chicago Bears, and his brother, that one will be taking place in 3 weeks at Soldier Field. We're thrilled to have Dean here, and as part of the library board, we thank him for generously donating his time to do this. And we're going to jump right in. The basic premise, I know that what you want to hear is his talk about the moon landing and the process that it took to get to the moon and the process it took to get off of the moon. I think when you hear some of the things about Dean's childhood and Neil Armstrong's childhood, how he made his decisions as the lunar commander become pretty apparent, and why he was able to do some of the things he was able to do in his life become pretty apparent as well. So we're going to start off. Dean, you grew up all around Ohio. Tell us what it was like growing up in the 1930s during the height of the Depression.
Well, my father, folks went bankrupt in the Depression. And so it was very tough for them to get through high school. And he did, and he took the civil service test in Ohio and passed it. And he became an auditor for the city of Ohio. So we grew up on a little 60-acre farm, middle west in Ohio by Fort Wayne. And we'd take off and be gone for a while my dad did auditing for courthouses. I was born on the Ohio-Pennsylvania line in Jefferson, Ohio. And I apologize for my voice, but I will get better. It just takes a while. Life was hard and we used rental houses, and so I grew up, my father's mother lived with us, and she slept with my sister in her bedroom, and Neil and I slept in our bedroom. So it was a very interesting life because my parents, my mother's side is German, and very, very strict and tight. My father is Scottish, and I guess they're kind of autocratic. But there was, everybody had duties. Everybody had to work every day. You went to school and you worked and you studied. There was no playtime. We didn't have any extra food, and like so many of you, that's just the way it was. I mean, we just didn't have extra things. At Christmas, we had one present. That's the way it was. We didn't think we were poor, but we didn't have any money. So I got to experience Lake Erie and fishing there, and seeing the fruit trees and all those things. And I enjoyed that. But we always came home to the farm and milked the cows, ran the separator, just the normal farm things, made lye soap, butchered every February, canned the meat, did everything so many of you know about. So that was our life, and Neil was gifted. And it's tough for me to talk about him, so you just give me some time. Go ahead.
Well, one thing that last week Dean and I got together and we just talked about his life and talked about things. It was apparent, I think, from what I've read, that at age 2, your father took him to the first air show. At age 6, he was in an airplane, a Ford tri-motor, for the first time. And I think something that many of us did as we were growing up, we used to get those balsa wood planes. Tell us what you and Neil did with those planes.
Well, he ordered them by mail, and they'd come, and he'd order, 1 or 2, whatever he could afford. And of course, we lived in the same bedroom together, and I was his gopher. Whatever he wanted, I provided. And I enjoyed it. He had a great mind. And you like Bill?
Well, very analytical, and the model planes they all come with directions. Neil and his brother Dean modified each model plane that they got to try to make it fly further, fly faster, fly straighter, whatever the case may be. So the designs were not always by the book. They were the Armstrong design for a plane. And then later on, maybe it was a science project, I'm not certain, where you built your own wind tunnel around a furnace. I mean, number one, you're 6, 7, 8 years old. Neil's, 5 years older. So, but who's thinking about building a wind tunnel around a furnace?
Well, it all started in junior high. We were living in Wapakoneta at the time. It actually started in Upper Sandusky, which we lived before that. And he had this idea that he would test his own planes if he could build a wind tunnel. Well, in the rental house in Upper Sandusky, we couldn't do that. So by the time he was 12, they had a junior high contest in the state of Ohio for engineering projects for students. And we have something similar to that here. Anyway, he told me to go to the junkyard and start buying supplies. And I said, well, guys, we need to lay out, what you want. He said, well, we need to have graduated sizes of piping. And we need to start with about a 6-inch pipe, and I'll get the rheostat somewhere. Yeah, then we got to order those blades, and we started out with one blade, and it was about that big, 16 inches, something like that. Well, that couldn't drive enough air, so we got another one. We mounted them like this. So he'd send me to the junkyard and I'd buy pipe. And this project would probably be 30 feet long of different sizes of pipe. So after a while, you know, I'm going down there with a nickel, dime, to buy this pipe. And I ran out of money. I'm riding his bike, by the way, back and forth, carrying it on his basket in front. And the guy at the junkyard thought it was funny. You know, he got into it, and he said, you know, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to supply all this pipe you guys want. And I said, well, we got to do it. You know, we got to have this science project done, I think, by February. Anyway, to make a long story short, we did it. And we hooked up the rheostat, and we realized we were going to generate a tremendous amount of velocity of air. So I opened up the glass door that supplied the coal to the furnace, and it was real cold. And I said, well, we'll try it. So I went up and looked at the breaker. Everything seemed okay. And he gradually turned that rheostat on and blew the fuse right up. So he says, go get a penny. This is not good. But anyway, I got the penny, put it in the fuse that had blown, and he says, you better go get Mom and tell her what we're doing. So I go up the stairs, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and she's in her house coat, and she comes down, and I said, well, we want to show you our wind tunnel. And she said, well, what are you going to do with that? And, you know, it's a science fair, and Neil's going to test his plans. So she said, well, okay, that looks pretty good. And she takes off to go cooking or whatever. And we get all ready to go. And Neil said, well, you better go up and tell her we're going to start this up because this thing is going to vibrate, you know, really shake. So I do, and right as she gets to the door to the basement, he turns up that rheostat, and it blew her house coat off. She was not happy. He won.
It sounds like something that Jared and Justin may have done. without the wind tunnel, actually. Other things. Well, so growing up, the thing that impressed me from talking with Dean earlier was the analytical aspect of his brother's life. There's 5 years difference. They never fought. 4.5. They never fought. Shared the same bed and never fought because there was always a way to figure out how to get to the root of the problem and how to address the problem. And I didn't have any brothers, but I had sisters, and there was no such thing as no fighting. I think that happened in everybody's family, or most everybody's family. And you're going to see how that analytical aspect of Neil Armstrong's mind paid dividends later on in his career as a test pilot, as a lunar, as the first man on the moon. So it's going to be hopefully something that we can piece together as we get there. Okay, because I know once again that we want to talk about, spend the majority of the time talking about what happened with the moon and everything. But his college career was something that was pretty extraordinary too. He goes off to college to the Purdue University at 16. Purdue, one of the great engineering schools in the United States. And as he's in the NADCAP program, at 16, goes to Purdue for 2 years, correct?
Correct.
And then ends up in Pensacola, Florida as an 18-year-old. And is it that time when he started flying? He didn't start flying, he flew earlier. But is this when he really started thinking about a career in the military, a career in service to his country?
I think we need to talk about at age 14, he has a pilot's license. Way before he can drive a car. So, you know, this guy knew what he wanted to do, and he went after it, and he did it. And he had to pay for all that himself by mowing and hacking it out. And, you know, he took the NAVCAP test at 16 and was awarded the scholarship and went to Purdue at 16 years old. You know, amazing.
Truly is. Truly is. And then 2 years, studies for 2 years at Purdue, then ends up in Pensacola, Florida. And this is 1948, I believe.
Correct.
It would have been. So still, it was after World War II, before the Korean War starts. And what does he do as he is at Pensacola and as he exits the base still?
Can't remember.
Okay, obviously, well, he becomes, I believe, a fighter pilot.
Oh, yeah.
Because as he does that, he's going to be eventually assigned to the Essex Carrier Group for the Navy.
Correct.
Okay. Flew off the carrier Essex in the Korean War.
38 combat missions.
Okay. And was shot down once, but never was captured.
Correct.
Okay. And then comes back to, after the Korean War's, or this time that the Korean War is over, comes back to Purdue. By this time, you're getting ready to graduate from high school.
I hitchhiked the day I graduated. I hitchhiked to California from Ohio to meet him in San Diego, coming off the carrier Essex.
Did you get there in time?
Barely.
And then both of you end up going back to Purdue.
Yeah.
Roomed together there.
Did
Took some classes together there.
psychology and history of religion. We both got A's.
And at that time, this is, if I'm getting my dates right, this has been 55, 56. So we're thinking about a space program, but we really haven't committed to anything as a nation. And then all of a sudden in 57, the Soviets launch a satellite around the Earth, basically something about the size of a volleyball to a basketball, in Sputnik, and it forces the United States to become in a situation where if we don't catch up, if we don't speed up, the Soviets are going to get past us. So Neil becomes a NACA. And what does the C stand for? You remember?
I don't know, but that's the forerunner to NASA. It's NACA in Cleveland, Ohio. And they came after him. It was 1956 at Purdue. And he got a letter from them recruiting him to be a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And of course, he had a great flying record in the Korean War. And so he thought about that. He really wanted to be a professor of aeronautical engineering. That's what his goal was in life. But his pilot experience was overwhelming. So he agreed to do that, and he went out to Edwards, and at the time there was Chuck Yeager, who was the hottest pilot in the world, and Scott Crossfield, and another guy, I can't remember his name, but they started flying the Bell X-1 and 2 and 5. He ended up, I think it was the second or third flight of the X-15. You know, they took it up and dropped it off the wing, and he set a world's altitude climb record in one of those experiences, he had to abort the flight plan and land in a different sea of salt
Yeah, that was at Bonneville Salt Flats, right?
in that area.
In that area.
In that area.
Oh.
So, anyway, he was criticized at the time, but because the flats were too soft, were not hard enough, and the chance of damaging a $4 billion plane, they kind of thought that was a bad decision on Neil's part. But everybody came to his rescue to say he'd done the right thing.
Yeah, I think if I remember the guy who organized the flight said that we gave him bad data, basically. We told him to if you need to do something, do this. He did that because what he saw was what he needed to do. He made that, once again, that analytical decision in a split second and made the right decision. And they came to his defense continually. Well, as he's doing what he's supposed to do, doing what he enjoys doing in flying, it never was really his life's goal to be an astronaut, was it?
Oh, no. No. In fact, for many years, he discussed the best way to get to the moon and thought that the best way was exactly through the X-15 program, because he had flown the X-15 into outer space, weightless. Nobody ever did it.
That's amazing. And once again, as the time goes on, that would have been the late 50s, early 1960s.
Correct.
And all through this time, you have the Mercury missions, Gemini, and all those other space programs that are set up. And he is not biding his time because he's still working and doing things that he wants to do to further his career. But as the moon launch begins to be talked about, and you got to think that the pressure that John Kennedy put on United States scientists and mathematicians was enormous. When you really think about it, because Kennedy comes out in, I think, maybe 62 or 61, 62, where he says, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. And that had to be enormous pressure for those scientists, the mathematicians, the engineers, everybody that involved in that, what will become NASA. As the moon launch or the moon program is getting finalized, when they make the decision that we're going to go to the moon, it's going to be Apollo 11, he is offered command as the posted commander in December of 1968. Can you tell us a little bit about the training that he had to go through, as you remember?
Well, I would drive down to Houston and visiting. He did a lot of training underwater. Huge weightlifting training, all kind of physical things to meet the criteria, because what they were going to go through, so much of it was unknown, and they just had to cover the gamut of everything they could think about. And you being the greatest, you know what I'm talking about.
Well, because the one thing I think people don't realize is the spacesuits that they had at that time were 180 pounds, which probably was more than your brother weighed.
Oh yeah.
So he's carrying a whole nother person along with him. And when they got to the moon, they only felt like they were weighing 30 pounds. So the underwater thing would have been something that they would have been able to do.
1/6.
Yeah. He also had to get very adept at landing the LLRVs. the lunar landing research vehicles and the training vehicles. How did he go about doing that? How did he get so good at doing that?
Well, he was assigned the chief engineer of the lunar excursion module. And that module was a three-legged, you may have been to Hutch and seen the mock-ups, but that was a very difficult flying assignment because you actually steered the ship by retro-rockets off of their feet, and you would have it where you would control this, like a joystick, but also you had to do the weight problem of the module itself. So they tried and couldn't get the right retro-rocket fuel source power to really fly it. So finally, can't think of the guy's name now that came up with the idea of an entirely different system. And they tried it and it worked. So Neil, they had the land down there, and you probably remember, he got to 300, almost 400 feet, and it just went column right. And he ejected. And it was on the concrete of in Houston, and I thought he was dead. So the news didn't, it was just a blank for a long period of time. So I get a telephone call, and it's Neil. He said, "Well, Dean, Neil." And, what are you doing? He said, "Well, I've been telling you."
Yeah, I think that was one of 34, 35 different opportunities to land that module to get good at what he was doing. So he's training, once he has been named to the post of commander in December of '68. The mission's going to take place in July of 1969. He's training his mates, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins, are going to be training right alongside him. And I'd imagine your family is, as July gets close, it becomes a time of, number one, great anxiety, but number two, a time of just, the expectations had to be just overwhelming at times. Because your brother is going to be, the guy that you share a bed with, is going to be on the moon. So your family gets invited down to Cape Canaveral for the launch. And this is a time when not all launches went the way that they should go. Because there have been many that had blown up on the launch pad. And even 20 years later, there are some that had obviously problems. So you're there, and they give you seats to watch the launch. Where were you? How far away were you? Who were you sitting with?
Well, the flight was mid-morning, and so we got up before dark and went out to the viewing. It's about, the stands were VIP stands about a half mile from the Saturn, and I think I was the first one there. But anyway, sat down, and we were just easing into it. In walks this older gentleman and his wife and his daughter, and they sat down right side of me. And it was Charles Lindbergh and his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, and in case you don't know it, great author. Need to read Anne Morrow Lindbergh's and her daughter. So we sat there for two hours, and he told me all about Neil and his experience with him. And it was wonderful.
I can only imagine. For those of you who don't know, Charles Lindbergh, the first man to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927. So he is America's greatest hero in 1927 and carries that mantle for quite a long time. As the launch takes place in mid-morning, as you watch it go out of sight, what do you think?
Great.
I mean, you had to be nervous, had to be scared. And then, is there a time when you think, okay, this first thing is done? And then,
I had great confidence in him. I really thought he'd do it
okay.
all through it, even with 13 seconds to go.
Yeah. Now, one thing I thought was pretty cool from NASA, they had basically, and this is once again 1969, before telecommunications were around and everything else, they had wired your parents' house, is that correct? With
just input.
the input, so everything that was going on at the command center in Houston, his parents were here in 1969, which once again, 50 years ago, that's pretty extraordinary. Were you able to listen to some of that?
I did, but I had to communicate with them.
Okay.
I mean, I wasn't hooked up like they were.
Okay. And that, I'm sure would have been something to have that happen. So that's July 16th of 1969 when the launch takes place. And the touchdown on the moon is going to take place on July 20th of 1969. As they get to the point where Buzz Aldrin and your brother are going to be in the lunar module, they separate away from Mike Collins, who's going to be flying the other I can't remember. Command module around the moon. And obviously computers are playing a major role in all of this because the computers are driving the lunar module. But that analytical mind goes to work as he's getting ready to land that vessel. Take us through that.
Well, Buzz admitted that he made 2 mistakes, but Neil had this fabulous mind, and he memorized not only his assignments, but he memorized Buzz. So what he did is, every time the computer would say there are problems, he would go through his checklist and then go through Buzz. And at 2 different times, he fixed that on the way to the
And as they're going, he's looking down or out the windows and recognizes that on the surface of the moon, where they're supposed to land, there are car-sized rocks that if they land there, it's hard telling what's going to happen to that lunar module. So he overrides the computers and makes a decision that, hey, this is where we're going to go, slows things down, boosts things up, whatever the case was. But they land in a different place than what they're supposed to land. And it's just simply because he made the decision that this is going to be a better place, and it ends up being the right decision. And he had how much time left?
13 seconds.
13 seconds worth of fuel left in order to do this at 280,000 or however many miles away the moon is from the Earth. Now, when that happens, Mike Collins is still up in the command module, and he's able to circle the Earth, and he ends up taking one of the iconic pictures in American history of the Earth from the command module. While all that's happening, your brother doesn't have time to sit there and look at the Earth's surface and say, "Wow, hey, look what I did."
It's so beautiful.
It would have had to have been. But what's your brother doing once they've landed and he's getting ready to become the first man in history to step on the moon? He's doing what?
Well, he's going through all the checklists. For the pilots, you got to debrief what you've done and record all that. And normal procedure for him. Also going through returning to the command module. He had to make sure that everything was correct. So once they got off, back up into take off, then he was ready to go.
Now, at this point in the world's history, 530 million people are watching this on television. It's one of those events if you're of a certain age, it's something that you remember. Because it is one of, and you remember it for all the good reasons as opposed to remembering something like the assassination of John Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr. This is one of those things that we remember because it's a fantastic celebration for the ingenuity of the United States and what it can do when it puts its mind to it. But your brother didn't see it that way, did he?
He was just doing my job.
Yeah, I think everybody else would have been, today you would have seen somebody taking a selfie, or they would have been doing some sort of victory dance, or they would have been doing some sort of self-promotion. And you don't see that at all. All you hear is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now, it had to be something that was pretty special to see your brother on the moon walking around.
I was so proud.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But at the same time, you're sitting there thinking, he's got to get off of this thing. And once again, when you have those packs on, and the moon suit on, that's 180 pounds worth of stuff. You've got a backpack on that's looks like just a big box sitting on your back. And once they get back into the lunar module, they run into a problem, don't they?
Yeah.
And that problem was that Buzz Aldrin had inadvertently, and it would have been easy to do, I would imagine, Buzz Aldrin hits the control panel
With his suit.
with his suit.
Yeah.
And so, not immediately knowing this, how does your brother figure this one out?
The same logic pattern he ran his whole life. Very calm, very good. Just did what he had to do. Didn't get excited. Heart rate, they had him. He just.
And what he did was take part of the pin, correct?
Correct.
And put it or brace it up against the switch that had been damaged, just to make certain that that switch stayed where it was supposed to be. And I would imagine that seeing that lunar module come off of the Earth's surface had to be another one of those times where you just took that deep breath and said, oh boy, another phase is complete. Now the link up back with Mike Collins, how difficult was that?
Well, Gemini 8 was the exact same situation, and Neil was command pilot of that, and they had all kind of difficulty controlling that, went out, and landed in the Indian Ocean, which was 3 oceans from where they were supposed to. John Egan from El Dorado was on the ship, the Hornet, and pulled them out of the sea. And Neil and that guy got together and had a good talk.
But they get the lunar module back connected with the command craft, and then I would think the most harrowing part of the whole mission, aside from when they separate and go land on the Earth, would probably be re-entry back into the Earth's atmosphere. Just simply because, once again, this is 1969. The computers aren't as accurate as they are today. The things that the coverings, the heat shields, and all of that stuff aren't as sophisticated as they are today. And that had to be quite a ride as he was coming back into the atmosphere. As he's doing that, you're watching all of this, I'm certain.
Yep.
And then you see him emerge into the atmosphere. You see him emerge, and all of a sudden we get the message that the command module is going to be landing in the Indian Ocean, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And as he returns, what's life like for the Armstrong family?
Great.
I would imagine. So your brother comes back, arguably, not arguably, he's the most famous person in the world at that time. And what's the United States do with he and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins? Because they're going to celebrate them. So what do they do? What do they ask of them? I guess would be a better way to say it, because it is a major commitment on their part. They go on a world tour.
They had to be in quarantine for 30 days, and then they went on a 26-country world tour. And Neil did extemporaneous speeches at every country. No notes, no written, everything instantaneous. And Collins' wife told the story of those speeches to the heads of states all over the world. Amazing.
Truly amazing. And then as he, you got to ask yourself, what do you do as an encore to that? How do you top that professional accomplishment? It's going to be difficult. But once again, he's the right person to have done that mission. Because from talking with you, what he saw was, I did my job, that's all I did.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make me any better, it doesn't make me any different than anybody else that's living in the United States at that time.
He didn't like ego people.
Which would have told me he would have some problems with some of the other astronauts. Because I don't think you can do that job without having a firm belief in yourself. Okay? So he comes back and does something that you said that he always wanted to do. He becomes a professor at the University of Cincinnati.
Aeronautical engineering.
And does that for 10 years or so?
10 years.
Okay. And all the time, I'm sure he's advocating on the case of NASA. He's saying that we need to do this, we need to do that, or suggestions, or what his input is, I'm sure, is accepted at every level. And from that point on, I think he sits on boards, a number of different boards for corporations in the United States. But then he becomes a glider pilot in his spare time. What attracted him to that? I mean, obviously he's had since the age of 2, he had a love affair with being above the earth.
He liked to take me flying because I would turn white. And he called me up and he's got a chance to go in half on a glider to set a record in California, a world's record of staying up in the air the longest. So he calls me up and he says, "You need to come down here, take a ride with me." I said, "I glider." I said, "I'll be down." So we go down there, we go out to this grass strip, and a little bitty plane takes us up, pulls us on a tether, and we get up about 5,000 feet, and that pilot just dropped the tether. I mean, this isn't going to work. I mean, we don't have a place to land. So he started flying around, and he said, "See that big cloud out there?" He says, "We're going to fly right into that cloud." And we did. And we hit that cloud, and I'm telling you, I think the plane went up 10,000 feet. Just like that. Amazing acceleration. He didn't set the record. He wanted to, but he didn't do it. I turned white.
I was going to ask if the plane's still clean. I think That would have been something to do. And as he, in his later years, he continued to be an advocate for the space program.
True.
Understood the value of it, understood the scientific research that was behind it. One other thing that, and I think I passed over this, he was, back in the late 50s, early 60s, concerned about, we've got to stay ahead of the Soviet Union. Correct?
Yeah, there's a good deal of scientific research that proves the value, because there's so many other things that go with it that help all the world.
Absolutely.
Velcro,
Ziploc bags.
Ziploc bags.
I didn't know this because, you know, my first question I have to interject is because I called or talked to my college roommates this week, and I said, give me questions that you'd ask. And the first question every one of them sent back, does he have a rock? And that was one of the first questions when I was talking to Dean that I asked, and no, but rocks were brought back to the earth in Ziploc bags. Moon dust was brought back to the earth in Ziploc bags. So where we get those things from, and that's a very simple thing, obviously, but it's something that everybody uses at one time or another.
Fear of contamination.
Yep.
Yep.
So, all right. So we have this life that is extraordinary. And the theme the one thing that I got out of talking with Dean the other day, and knowing Dean for the last 25 years or so, the analytical aspects, let's think through it, and as we think through it, because we've been educated well, we're going to make the right decision. And your brother lived by that as a pilot and as an astronaut.
And a human being.
And as a human being. And that truly is an amazing legacy to leave. So, Dean, if you don't mind, I'm going to open it up to members of the audience today. Anybody that has questions. And if anybody has a question, feel free to ask. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, neighbor.
Oh, Sean.
Al.
So,
This is my granddaughter.
you probably remember that I interviewed Neil when I was in 1st or 2nd grade, and he told me that his 1st grade teacher wrote "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And then later we talked about this, and you said, I think he was pulling your leg because you were in 1st grade. So how did he come up with that? Do you remember?
This is a huge debatable point. I did an interview with the British Broadcasting Company, and they asked the same question, and I told them what I remember, but they didn't agree with that. and you know, they were impressed. They had it in their mind what they wanted it to be, and that's the way they published it. Can you imagine that? That's really hard to believe.
One thing I learned from talking with Dean is that when he doesn't feel comfortable answering a question, he will evade the question. Which would make him a wonderful politician. And we're not even going to go there. Did you have a question, young lady? Yeah, or a young man. I saw a hand up. Yes, sir.
Have you ever thought about flying with him?
Oh, I did a lot. I did. All through his life. He asked the question, and I thought about flying with my brother. And yeah, we've had a great time together.
Yes, Mr.
Dean, as you're growing up in Ohio, at one of your places where you lived, Did you have the neighbors named Gorski?
Okay. Neil and I were invited to Purdue to do a benefit, and they had a tremendous amount of press there. And a press guy asked that exact question. And with that, Neil said, "This interview is over."
Mrs. Good.
First of all, I want to say that your brother and all of the people who worked on the missions from Houston are just a great inspiration to many people of many ages. Our son right now happens to be working down at Johnson Space Center, and we talked with him on the phone this morning. And the National Park Service and NASA have just restored the mission control room down there in Houston back to the way that it was in the 60s when they were doing all of these missions. And it's now on the National Register of Historic Places. But, you know, it was down to the pencils and the ashtrays and the coffee cups and all of that kind of thing. So if you ever get a chance to go to Houston and visit Johnson Space Center, that's one place that you would not want to miss. It's really quite interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was just curious if Neil ever talked about going back to the moon, or why he didn't go back, or...
I don't recall him ever mentioning that. I think he felt like he did his job. Move on.
If I get the math right, he would have been 39 when he landed on the moon. So he still had a lot of productive time left, but there were only, what, 4 more? Somebody, if I'm right, 4 more lunar missions or moon missions?
Gene Cernan.
I think after that. So there weren't many others. So he would have had to probably go back into line, possibly. But anyone else? Yes?
When you said you landed on the moon, you had 13 seconds of fuel left.
Correct.
What was involved on getting off of the moon again?
Entirely different power structure. Retro rockets
Lifted you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not involved. Entirely different fuel, different everything.
Did you try to talk your brother out of going to the moon?
That's a good question.
I never tried to talk my brother out of anything.
Go get her.
Yeah.
And nice shirt, young lady.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Okay,
Yes.
one.
Okay, yeah.
Did Neil walk the streets of Marion often? Did he come to visit?
Oh, yeah. There are a number of people in town that have seen him. We came, every year we had the Armstrong Open. And so he would come. He was on the board of Lear, and Bill Lear, who founded the company, had established a great relationship with Neil through the years, as Neil was a test pilot for Lear. And so he would come and stay out at the lake with us, and had his own room still there. Wouldn't want to sleep anyplace else. Very private person. But we played golf here a bunch. And I have the trophy, the Armstrong trophy, at the house with our scorecard. Yeah, we had a great time. Chris Costello's son talked with him. Gensel played with him. I don't know. He was there quite a bit. Enjoyed it.
Yes, ma'am.
I've watched the CNN movie that they passed, the 2-hour movie, twice in the past week. I just wondered if you had seen it and if there was footage that you had never seen or what you thought of it.
I can see it.
I take it, it's pretty amazing.
I'd like to.
They discovered a lot of footage and it's got audio with it, and so much of it is the Space Center and showing the expressions on all those guys in their white shirts and ties. You know,
I would appreciate you sharing that with me.
Yeah, it's,
Thank you.
yeah. CNN, it started showing it last week and it was on again last night, and I'm sure they'll probably continue. It's just called Apollo 11, and it's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
How did your parents handle having a son who was an astronaut? Were they pretty confident too?
Well, I may cut you off. This is, once again, another area that doesn't really feel comfortable talking about. So, okay.
They were extremely proud.
Well, let me say that an astronaut, an automobile executive, and a trauma surgeon nurse, surgical nurse, and real estate entrepreneur was his sister. So, in the whole family, I would think there would be a lot of places to be proud. Yes, ma'am.
Who was better at golf, you or Neil?
Who was better at golf?
Great question. He and I were both students of the game. And we talked back and forth all the time about how to solve different problems. I'll give you one. He was a slicer. So we're playing in California. Can't think of the Dinah Shore course. And he sliced the ball out of bounds off the tee. He said, we're going to solve that problem. And I just smiled because I was whipping on him bad. Anyway, he said, Dean, go out there and mark that ball. And I did. And he said, no. Walk over to the middle of the fairway and walk that off in, 3 feet at a time and tell me how many feet that is to the middle of the fairway. So I did. 15 degrees is the end result of the experiment. So he had a club made to correct the 15 degrees. That's my brother.
Any other questions? Well, I know on behalf, once again, of the library board, we did this in an hour, and we said we were going to keep it at an hour. Sir, I thank you very much for giving us your time. And once again, thank you very much for being on this panel. For taping and filming this, and to the library board for the snacks, the refreshments that we have in the back. So, thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Grant. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dean. It's very informative. In honor of the 50th anniversary and of Dean's presentation, the library has purchased 5 or 6 books on Neil Armstrong and the Apollo 11 event, and so there's a little dedication plaque inside the book that says in honor of Dean and Neil for what they've contributed to us. So just wanted to let you know they're available at the library, and you might take a look. They're back there. So once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Jean. Thank you all. Thanks for coming.